Evelyn's arrival at the Forbidden Cliff Hotel feels anything but welcoming. The hotel stands imposingly on the edge of a sheer cliff, overlooking a churning, endless ocean. The setting sun bathes the craggy rocks in a blood-red hue, casting jagged shadows that stretch toward her like the claws of some hidden predator. Evelyn had imagined this place as a serene retreat, a secluded escape from the bustle of city life. But as she steps out of her car and into the chilling sea air, a heavy, inexplicable sense of dread coils around her chest. The silence is unsettling, broken only by the sound of the waves crashing far below, and as she watches the darkened waters, it almost seems as though they're watching back. Once inside, the hotel's charm is tainted by an eerie stillness. Every corner is filled with shadows, deeper and darker than they should be, and the hallways stretch into darkness that feels suffocatingly close. The floors creak as she steps cautiously down the hall to her room, each sound amplified in the oppressive quiet, echoing like whispers of long-lost guests. Portraits of past visitors and employees line the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her every move with an intensity that feels almost alive. In the dim light, the expressions of the painted faces twist subtly, and Evelyn finds herself glancing over her shoulder, irrationally expecting to catch them in the act of observing her. Her room is quaint yet outdated, with floral wallpaper that looks as if it hasn't been changed in decades. The scent of dampness lingers in the air, and a chill seeps through the window, even though it's tightly shut. She unpacks slowly, hoping the routine will chase away the strange unease that's settled deep in her bones. But as she places her things in the closet, she notices something peculiar. A rusted old key tucked away in the back corner, partially hidden beneath the dusty floorboards. Evelyn picks it up, feeling its weight, and notes the small wave symbol engraved on its surface. Her fingers tingle, as though the metal itself pulses faintly under her touch, and a strange, almost familiar dread gnaws at her. She places the key back, but an ominous thought lingers. Something in this place has been waiting for her. That night, sleep evades her, chased away by a disturbing sense of presence in the room. The silence deepens, thick as fog, pressing in around her until every small sound, the ticking of her watch, the sigh of the wind outside, seems magnified. Suddenly, a low hum begins to echo from somewhere beyond her door, rising and falling like a distant, haunting lullaby. It's faint, almost indistinct, yet unmistakably real. Her heartbeat quickens, her breath shallow, as if the very walls are alive, vibrating with an invisible pulse. She forces herself to lie still, eyes wide in the darkness, convinced the sound is only her imagination. But the melody grows louder, a rhythmic whisper weaving through the room. It feels like a voice, chanting words she can't understand, laced with an intent that chills her to the core. Compelled by a mix of fear and an odd, hypnotic curiosity, Evelyn steps out of bed and moves toward the door. Her hand trembles as she reaches for the handle, feeling the cold metal searing against her skin. She opens it just a crack, peering into the empty corridor. Shadows pool in the corners, thick and heavy, and she could swear they move as though they're alive, breathing in sync with the haunting lullaby. Drawn toward the end of the hall, Evelyn follows the whispers, her steps barely making a sound on the worn carpet. The silence thickens with each step, pressing on her like an invisible weight, and she feels a faint tugging, as though something beyond her control is guiding her. She approaches the grand window at the hall's end, where the moonlight spills over the cliffside. There, just outside, the ocean stirs violently, waves crashing against the rocks with an unnatural ferocity. It's then that she sees them, faint, ghostly figures drifting near the edge of the cliff, their forms flickering in and out of sight as though trapped between worlds. They sway gently, as if swayed by a silent rhythm, faces turned toward the hotel. Evelyn stumbles back, heart racing, and as she backs away, she catches a glimpse of her reflection in the window pane. Her face appears strangely distorted, her eyes wide with terror. But something else is wrong. she realizes with horror that another shadow stands just behind her. She spins around, but the hallway is empty, filled only with the echo of her own shallow breathing. Evelyn tries to shake off the strange encounter from the previous night, convincing herself it was nothing more than an overactive imagination fed by exhaustion. But something nags at her, a strange feeling that she's not as unfamiliar with this place as she'd like to believe. As she wanders the grounds later that day, she catches glimpses of familiar sights. The twisted oak tree near the cliffside, a weathered bench overlooking the ocean, and an old stone well that looks as if it hasn't been touched in decades. A fragment of memory, faint and fleeting, tugs at the edges of her mind. A memory she doesn't fully recognize, but that fills her with an inexplicable dread. Back in her room, Evelyn decides to unpack the few belongings she has left. She opens her suitcase and stops suddenly, her breath catching as she notices an object she didn't remember packing. A small, weathered music box with a faded wave symbol carved into its lid. Her fingers hover over it, the touch of the cold metal sending an uneasy thrill down her spine. She recalls faint memories of hearing a lullaby, one she can't place, but that feels unsettlingly familiar. She clicks open the lid, and as the delicate, eerie tune fills the room, her mind is flooded with flashes of scenes she can barely piece together. A dark cliff, waves crashing violently below, and a child's voice singing softly to the same tune, now echoing through her room. The music fills every corner of the room, its haunting notes weaving through the silence, pulling Evelyn deeper into memories she's tried to bury. Suddenly, an image of herself as a child, standing at the edge of a cliff and staring into the same endless ocean, surfaces with chilling clarity. In the memory, she's clutching the very same music box, her small fingers wrapped tightly around it, as if for protection. She remembers hearing voices then, whispers carried on the wind that spoke her name, urging her closer to the edge. A cold sweat breaks across her skin as she realizes that she's been here before, that somehow this place had once held her within its grasp, leaving her with scars her mind had chosen to forget. Trying to shake off the feeling, Evelyn closes the music box, its final note hanging in the air like a ghostly breath. She places it on the bedside table, feeling an overwhelming urge to get out of the room, to escape the unsettling grip of her fragmented memories. She makes her way to the library in hopes of distracting herself, but instead finds herself drawn to a particular shelf near the back, where a row of journals and dusty old records lie untouched. One journal in particular catches her eye, bound in worn leather and marked with the same wave symbol that adorns her music box and the rusted key she found in the closet. She opens the journal, its yellowed pages filled with frantic handwriting, and begins reading entries detailing the experiences of a guest who had stayed at the hotel many years ago. As she reads, chills prick her skin. The writer describes sleepless nights haunted by whispers, visions of ghostly figures along the cliffside, and a strange, magnetic pull toward the edge of the cliff. The final entry ends abruptly, with words scrawled hastily. They remember. They always remember. I must go back to the sea. A sudden wave of nausea grips Evelyn as the realization sinks in. Whoever had written this journal had been called to the cliffs, just as she had been. A shiver runs down her spine as she recalls that eerie, familiar lullaby, and she can no longer deny that her connection to this place runs deeper than she'd thought. Panic swells within her as memories from her past begin to resurface more clearly. She remembers a cold night years ago, her small hand held tightly by an adult she can't remember, both of them standing at the edge of a cliff much like this one, watching as something dark moved beneath the waves, calling to them. She stumbles back from the journal, her breathing quick and shallow. The room seems to darken around her, the shadows stretching and shifting as though they're alive, pressing in closer. The faint sound of the lullaby drifts through the air again, even though the music box remains closed. Evelyn's heart races as she feels a presence behind her, something ancient and familiar, watching her. She dares not turn around, but a cold, bony touch grazes her shoulder, sending icy needles down her spine. Finally, she bolts from the library, her footsteps echoing wildly down the hall as she races back to her room. But the music follows her, seeping through the walls, filling the empty corridors with that haunting lullaby. As she reaches her room and slams the door shut, she realizes, with growing terror, that whatever memories she's buried are clawing their way back, pulling her deeper into the darkness of the Forbidden Cliff Hotel's mysterious and horrifying past. Evelyn's pulse thunders in her ears as she collapses onto the bed, gripping the edges of the mattress as though it's the only thing anchoring her to reality. The music box remains shut, yet its haunting melody seeps through the room like an insidious whisper, burrowing into her mind. Each note unearths more fragments of forgotten memories. A child's hand holding tightly to hers, the salt-scented wind at the cliff's edge, and the ever-present feeling of being watched by something lurking in the depths below. She senses the presence of a choice hanging heavily in the air, one that ties her fate to this place. But it's a choice that fills her with paralyzing fear. Suddenly, the room feels stifling, as though the walls are closing in on her, pressing down with a suffocating weight. Her mind races, desperate to find an escape, but as her gaze lands on the rusted key she'd found earlier, the decision becomes clear in a way that terrifies her. The key is a part of her past, a symbol of something she'd forgotten, something that has been buried in the shadowed corners of her mind for years. She realizes, with a cold certainty, that the only way to break free from the hotel's hold is to confront the past she's hidden from herself. But to do that, she must sacrifice something precious, a part of herself, a memory that she's held onto for reasons she can no longer recall. A knock at the door jolts her from her thoughts, and her heart leaps into her throat. She opens it to find no one there, only the dim, flickering hallway stretching emptily in both directions. At her feet, however, lies an object wrapped in an old, faded cloth. She picks it up cautiously and unwraps it, revealing a photograph, a faded picture of a young girl standing at the edge of the same cliff outside. The girl's face is partially turned away, but there's something unsettlingly familiar in her posture, in the way her small hand reaches out toward the dark waters below. Evelyn realizes with dawning horror that the girl is her younger self, frozen in a moment she'd long ago forced herself to forget. The choice becomes painfully clear. She could destroy the photograph, severing her connection to that part of herself, effectively erasing whatever memory has tied her to this place. But the weight of what that might mean fills her with dread. Destroying the photograph would mean sacrificing a piece of her identity, a memory that, despite its horror, is still a part of who she is. Yet the alternative, to stay, to risk being drawn ever closer to the cliff's deadly edge, feels equally unthinkable. As she clutches the photograph, the walls around her seem to shift, and shadows move in the periphery of her vision. The lullaby grows louder, echoing through her mind, and she swears she hears her own name whispered faintly in the melody. It's as though the hotel itself waits for her decision, patient and insidious, feeding on her fear and hesitation. Her grip tightens around the photograph, her knuckles turning white. She knows, deep down, that if she doesn't make a choice soon, the hotel will make it for her, and it will not show mercy. In that moment of desperation, Evelyn becomes aware of another, darker option. The hotel seems to offer it to her, a silent, unspoken pact. She could offer something even more precious than a memory. She could give up her very sanity, allowing herself to be consumed by the darkness that haunts this place, but in return, it would let her walk free, though forever changed. The thought claws at her, and the fear twists into something else: temptation. She envisions herself leaving the hotel, her mind fractured and hollow, free from the memories, but forever haunted by the shadow that would live within her. The photograph trembles in her hand as she fights the urge to let go, to destroy that part of herself in exchange for the promise of peace. But as she gazes at the faded image, a single tear slips down her cheek. She remembers, just barely, the innocence she had before the cliff, before the whispers and the darkness. She can't bear to let it go entirely, to erase it from existence. Yet, as the shadows close in and the room darkens, Evelyn realizes she may have no choice at all. Evelyn's sense of reality begins to fray, the familiar boundaries between the tangible and the supernatural dissolving around her. Each night, the hotel grows more sinister, its hallways stretching longer, twisting like a maze designed to entrap her. Shadows flicker in the corners of her vision, darting away whenever she turns to look directly. It's as though the darkness has taken on a life of its own, pulsing with a sinister energy that follows her every move. She tries to rationalize it, to convince herself it's only her mind playing tricks, but deep down, she knows she's not alone. Something lurks in the shadows, watching, waiting. One night, as the clock strikes midnight, Evelyn feels an overwhelming compulsion to leave her room. Her feet move almost against her will, carrying her down the dim, narrow hallways where the wallpaper peels like decaying skin, revealing dark, twisted wood beneath. The silence around her is oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards, as if someone or something is mirroring her steps just out of sight. Her breathing quickens, every sound amplified in the stillness, until she's certain she can hear her own heartbeat echoing back at her, distorted and ghostly. As she reaches the lobby, she feels an icy breeze sweep past her, chilling her to the bone. The lights flicker, casting fleeting glimpses of ghostly figures drifting in and out of sight. They hover near the walls, translucent and hollow-eyed, their mouths open in silent screams. Their gazes fix on her for a brief, agonizing moment before they vanish back into the shadows. Evelyn's skin prickles, and a deep, primal fear rises within her, as if her very soul is warning her to flee. But something holds her in place, rooting her to the spot. She feels a whisper brush against her ear, a faint murmur that chills her blood. They're watching, always watching. The words are barely audible, carried on a breath that feels too close, too real. Her hand flies to her neck, where she feels a cold, clammy sensation, as if a hand, long dead, had just grazed her skin. She staggers back, pressing herself against the wall, her wide eyes darting around the lobby. She can feel the darkness pressing in closer, tightening around her like a noose. The shadows shift, stretching across the floor, forming shapes that resemble skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare her. A faint melody drifts down the hallway, the same haunting lullaby she heard before, but now layered with eerie whispers, voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear and sorrow. They speak words she can't fully understand, but the intent is clear. A warning, a plea, a curse. The voices grow louder, forming a symphony of despair, and she feels an overwhelming urge to scream, to drown them out, but her voice is trapped in her throat. Evelyn stumbles back, only to find herself in front of an ornate mirror hanging in the lobby, a relic that seems out of place in the decayed surroundings. The mirror is ancient, its glass tarnished and warped, but when she looks into it, she sees something impossible. Her reflection, standing rigid and staring back with wide, unblinking eyes. Yet, the reflection does not mimic her movements. Instead, it raises a hand to the glass, pressing its fingers against the surface as if trying to escape. Evelyn's heart pounds as her reflection's mouth opens, and a whisper emerges, not from her lips, but from the glass itself. "You're almost mine." Paralyzed with terror, Evelyn watches as her reflection twists and contorts, its eyes darkening into hollow voids. She feels a pull from the mirror, an invisible force urging her to step closer, to press her own hand against the cold, warped glass. The urge is so strong that she finds herself reaching out, fingertips mere inches from the surface. Just as her fingers are about to touch the mirror, she hears a scream, a blood-curdling wail that echoes through the lobby, breaking her trance. She snaps back, her hand dropping as she stumbles away from the mirror, heart hammering wildly. She backs into the wall, clutching her chest, and watches as the shadows in the mirror twist into grotesque shapes, faces with hollow eyes and twisted mouths clawing at the glass, desperately trying to escape. The reflection of the lobby shifts, distorting into a nightmare version of itself, where shadows crawl across the walls and figures dangle from the ceiling, suspended by invisible threads. Evelyn closes her eyes, shaking, whispering to herself that it's all in her head, that none of this is real. When she opens her eyes again, the mirror has returned to normal, reflecting only her pale, terrified face and the dimly lit lobby behind her. But she can still hear the whispers, softer now, fading into the darkness, yet leaving an imprint in her mind, an unshakable sense of dread. The shadows in the lobby settle, but she knows they haven't gone. They're only waiting, biding their time, watching her every move, ready to lure her deeper into the dark embrace of the Forbidden Cliff Hotel's ancient, relentless curse. Evelyn's grip on reality continues to slip as the days pass in a feverish blur of fear and confusion. Every inch of the hotel feels alive with malice, its walls seething with whispers that seem to sink into her skin. She's haunted by visions, fleeting, terrifying images that distort her sense of time and place. Each night, the hotel becomes a labyrinth, with hallways that shift and doors that open into impossible spaces. Shadows twist and coil in the corners, and the air grows thick with a feeling of dread, pressing down on her until every breath feels like a struggle. The visions grow more intense, their horrors seeping into her waking hours. She sees flashes of figures standing at the cliff's edge, staring out at the turbulent ocean with blank, lifeless eyes. In one horrifying glimpse, she watches as they slowly turn toward her, their faces pale and featureless, their mouths gaping in silent screams. Their bodies teeter at the edge, drawn by an invisible force, until they fall, swallowed by the dark, churning sea below. Each time, Evelyn feels the pull herself, an inexplicable urge to join them, to give in to the same terror that claimed their souls. One night, the hotel plunges her into a waking nightmare that feels more vivid, more real than anything she's experienced before. She finds herself standing at the edge of the cliff, her bare feet sinking into the cold, wet earth. The wind howls around her, carrying with it faint, mournful cries that sound like echoes from the depths of the ocean. Her body is rooted to the spot, and she feels a deep, insidious fear creeping up her spine, a terror so profound it numbs her to everything else. It whispers to her, seductive and dangerous, urging her to look down, to peer into the abyss that stretches endlessly below. As she stares into the darkness, her mind floods with memories she can't place, images of faces she's never seen and places she's never been. She sees herself as a child, standing in the same spot, holding her mother's hand as they both look down into the void together. She remembers her mother's whispered words, telling her that the sea was alive, that it had a hunger it could never satisfy. Evelyn's fear becomes an all-consuming presence, gnawing at her sanity, and she realizes with growing horror that the hotel is using her own terror against her, feeding on it, twisting it to make her believe that the only way out is through the cliff's dark promise. The urge to jump, to surrender herself to the depths, becomes nearly unbearable. Her heart pounds in her chest, her palms sweat, and a voice in her mind tells her that all the fear, all the horror will end if she simply lets go. She imagines the cold embrace of the sea, the peace that might come with oblivion. For a brief, terrifying moment, she contemplates it, letting go of her last shreds of resistance, allowing herself to be claimed by the darkness that has haunted her since she arrived. But just as her body sways forward, a new vision strikes her with such intensity that she staggers back, clutching her head. She sees herself, not at the edge of the cliff, but within the hotel, surrounded by shadowy figures with hollow eyes and twisted smiles. They murmur to her, their voices dripping with malice, promising her peace if she'll only give in. But there's something else in their eyes, a hunger, a sinister delight in her suffering. She realizes with a sickening clarity that the hotel doesn't want her to escape. It wants to consume her entirely, to strip away every piece of her sanity until she's nothing more than another lost soul, bound to the cliff forever. Evelyn stumbles back from the cliff's edge, her heart racing as she fights to shake off the lingering pull. The ocean seems to swell with anger, waves crashing violently against the rocks below, as if the sea itself is enraged by her refusal. She turns and runs back to the hotel, but the shadows in the hallway are darker, thicker, and she feels them pressing against her, tightening around her like a noose. Every step echoes with whispers, words she can't fully understand, but their intent is clear. You cannot escape. Back in her room, she collapses onto the floor, gasping for breath. The lullaby she's heard since her first night plays again, soft and haunting, winding its way through her thoughts, wrapping around her mind like a siren song. She feels the fear inside her, a pulsing, living thing, gnawing away at her resolve. She knows the hotel is watching, feeding on her terror, twisting her mind to make her believe that escape is impossible, that there's no salvation beyond surrender. But Evelyn clings to a sliver of defiance, a faint memory of her life before the hotel, of the person she once was. She reminds herself of the world beyond these cursed walls, of sunlight, laughter, and life free from the shadows that haunt her now. She takes a deep, trembling breath, willing herself to resist the temptation, to hold on to her fear without letting it control her. In the silence, Evelyn realizes that the hotel's power lies not only in its supernatural horrors, but in the way it manipulates her deepest fears, weaving them into a web of despair that threatens to break her spirit. The temptation remains, a dark whisper in the back of her mind, but she steels herself against it, determined to survive, to resist the call of the cliff no matter what the cost. For now, she has managed to cling to her sanity, but as the night stretches on, she knows the hotel's game is far from over, and that her struggle has only just begun. Evelyn's nights have blurred into a waking nightmare, each moment a dizzying descent into fear and confusion. She's no longer certain where her memories end and the hotel's influence begins. Every night brings new horrors, new whispers echoing through the hallways, and a growing certainty that something dark and ancient awaits her just beyond the edge of the cliff. Tonight, however, the terror is sharper, more intense, as if the entire hotel is holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable. Around midnight, Evelyn feels a compulsion to leave her room, a pull stronger and more insistent than ever. She doesn't want to go, every instinct screaming at her to stay where it's safe, but her feet move as though guided by an unseen force. She steps into the hallway, where the familiar, suffocating shadows are deeper, twisting and shifting like living things. Each step feels heavier, her heartbeat thundering in her ears, as if she's marching toward an execution she can't escape. The hallways stretch longer than before, contorting in unnatural ways, and the air grows colder, biting into her skin. She stumbles upon the grand staircase, but it no longer leads to the lobby. Instead, it spirals downward, deeper into the hotel's bowels. The walls pulse and breathe, covered in dark, moldy stains that resemble creeping vines, and the silence is pierced by faint, distorted whispers, their words unintelligible but filled with malice. She realizes with horror that she's descending into the heart of the hotel, drawn toward whatever dark secret holds, a truth she may not survive uncovering. At the bottom of the staircase, she finds herself in a forgotten part of the hotel, a cavernous room filled with ancient relics, dusty mirrors, and tattered furniture. At the center stands a large, ornate mirror, much like the one she'd encountered in the lobby, but far older, its glass warped and clouded with age. Shadows flicker within the mirror, twisting into shapes that seem to watch her with cold, calculating eyes. She steps closer, compelled by an invisible force, and as she gazes into the mirror, she sees not only her reflection, but the image of the cliff and the crashing waves below. Her reflection morphs, her face growing pale, her eyes hollow and dark, until she no longer recognizes herself. A voice, low and venomous, slithers from the mirror, whispering words that chill her to the bone. You belong to the cliff, just as they all did. Her reflection smiles, a twisted, mocking grin, and she sees figures emerging behind it. Ghostly, lost souls, their faces frozen in terror. Each of them, she realizes, is a victim of the cliff, claimed by the hotel and bound to this cursed place for eternity. The truth crashes over her in a wave of terror. This is the heart of the hotel's power, the place where it binds its victims, trapping them in an endless cycle of fear and despair. She realizes now that she's connected to these souls, that she, too, is meant to join them, to become one with the shadows that haunt the cliff. Her past, her connection to this place, has made her an ideal offering, and the hotel has been grooming her, feeding off her fear, preparing her for this final moment. The voices swell, louder and more insistent, filling her mind with visions of the cliff, of herself standing at the edge, arms outstretched as she surrenders to the darkness below. She feels the urge to give in, to let herself fall, to become one with the souls trapped within the hotel. But a small, defiant spark flares within her, a memory of her life before this place, a life free from shadows and fear. She clings to it, fighting against the overwhelming force, pulling her toward the mirror, toward the truth that would consume her entirely. In that moment of desperation, Evelyn screams, her voice echoing through the room, breaking the spell. The mirror shatters, shards flying through the air, and she collapses to the ground, gasping for breath. But as she looks around, she realizes that her fight is far from over. The shadows in the room grow denser, swirling around her, furious and hungry. She has rejected the hotel's claim, defied its call, and now it seeks to punish her, to drag her deeper into its darkness. Evelyn stumbles to her feet, her heart racing as she searches for an escape. The staircase has vanished, replaced by a dark, endless hallway that stretches toward the cliff. She can feel the shadows closing in, hear the whispers of lost souls urging her to join them, to surrender to the pull of the cliff. But she steels herself, focusing on that tiny, stubborn spark of resistance, and begins to run, her footsteps echoing in the silence as she races down the hallway. As she reaches the cliff's edge, she finds herself facing the churning, malevolent ocean, its waves crashing with a fury that shakes the ground beneath her. The whispers swell, louder and more insistent, filling her mind with visions of her own demise, of her body falling, her soul claimed by the sea. But Evelyn refuses to give in. With a final, defiant cry, she steps back from the edge, her mind clearer and more resolute than ever. In that moment, the hotel seems to tremble, its power weakened by her resistance. She can feel the darkness recede, the shadows loosening their grip, and the whispers fade into silence. For the first time, she senses that she has a chance, a slim, fragile chance, to escape the cliff's curse, to break free from the hotel's relentless grasp. She turns and runs, leaving the cliff and its terrible secrets behind, vowing never to return, to never again let fear claim her as it had so many others. As she steps through the front doors, she feels the weight lift, the cold embrace of the hotel finally releasing her. But even as she leaves, a faint whisper lingers in the back of her mind, a reminder that the cliff is patient and that it will wait for her return. Evelyn's brief moment of freedom is shattered as she stumbles back into the hotel's lobby, realizing with dread that the exit has vanished behind her, replaced by a wall covered in dark, pulsating wallpaper. It's as if the hotel itself has closed in around her, trapping her in its malevolent embrace. The air is thick with a damp, rotting smell, and shadows twist along the walls, forming grotesque shapes that shift and slither in the dim light. She can feel an oppressive weight pressing down on her chest, a dark energy coiling tighter with each passing second. Every instinct screams that this is the end, that the hotel has finally decided to claim her. As she stands frozen, Evelyn hears footsteps echoing from a distant corridor, slow and deliberate, each step reverberating through the silence like a death knell. She can feel the presence of something unspeakably old and powerful moving toward her, a force that's been waiting, lurking in the shadows since she arrived. The footsteps grow louder, and with each one, the shadows around her deepen, thickening into a tangible darkness that pulses with malevolent intent. She tries to run, but her legs feel as though they're wading through thick, invisible sludge, trapping her in place. From the darkness emerges a figure, cloaked in shadow, its features indistinct yet terrifyingly familiar. It's a twisted reflection of herself, an embodiment of her deepest fears and regrets. The figure's hollow eyes meet hers, filled with a hunger that's both predatory and personal, as if it knows every dark corner of her mind. Its voice is a low, hissing whisper that seeps into her thoughts, blending with her own fears until she can no longer tell where her terror ends and the entity's begins. You try to leave, it sneers, but you belong here, Evelyn. You always have. The realization crashes over her like icy water. The hotel has shaped itself around her darkest memories, feeding on her fears, using her own mind to trap her in an endless nightmare. She's no longer merely a guest. She's become a part of the hotel itself, woven into its fabric, bound to the cliff, and the soul's lost to its pull. The entity extends a hand, skeletal and cold, and she feels an unbearable chill crawl up her spine, freezing her in place. Its grip tightens around her wrist, and she feels her life force drain, her strength slipping away as if the very essence of her soul is being absorbed. In her desperation, Evelyn remembers the rusty key, the one marked with a wave symbol she'd found hidden in her room. With her last ounce of strength, she yanks it from her pocket, brandishing it like a weapon against the shadowy figure. To her surprise, the entity recoils, its eyes narrowing with a mixture of anger and fear. The key glows faintly in her hand, a dim, defiant light that cuts through the darkness surrounding her. The figure's hold loosens just enough for her to pull free, and she stumbles backward, clutching the key as though it's her last line of defense. The entity snarls, its form twisting and distorting, growing larger as the shadows around it coalesce into a towering mass of darkness. It lunges at her, and Evelyn feels the icy coldness envelop her, its weight pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. The whispers return, louder and more vicious, filling her mind with images of her own demise, of her body lying broken at the cliff's edge, her soul trapped forever within the hotel. But she grips the key tighter, focusing on the faint warmth it emits, a reminder of her life before this nightmare. In a final act of defiance, Evelyn raises the key and drives it into the shadow's chest. The entity lets out a deafening, inhuman scream, a sound that reverberates through the walls of the hotel, shaking the very foundation. The darkness shudders, writhing as cracks begin to form along its surface, and the entire room fills with blinding light. The shadows peel away, disintegrating into wisps of smoke, and the hotel's oppressive hold loosens. For a brief moment, Evelyn sees the faces of the lost souls trapped within the entity, their hollow eyes filled with silent pleas for release. As the entity dissolves, Evelyn collapses to her knees, gasping for breath, her vision blurred and her body weak. She feels an overwhelming sense of relief, as if a massive weight has been lifted, but she knows the ordeal isn't over yet. The hotel remains dark and silent, its walls scarred with the remnants of shadow, and she can still feel the pull of the cliff just outside. She stumbles toward the doorway, her hand trembling as she reaches for the handle, praying that this time it will open. The door swings open, and she steps out onto the cliff's edge, the cool night air filling her lungs. But as she looks back, she realizes the hotel hasn't disappeared. It looms over her, its windows dark and empty, yet she senses a watchful presence within, as if the walls themselves are waiting, patient and unyielding. She understands now that the hotel has released her, but not without a price. Part of her remains bound to this place, a sliver of her soul forever tied to the cliff, marked by the horrors she endured. As she walks away, Evelyn feels a strange, unshakable pull, a faint whisper in the back of her mind that promises she'll return one day. She glances back one last time, and for a moment, she sees her own shadow standing in the hotel's doorway, watching her with hollow eyes. The cliff and the hotel have claimed many souls, and they are patient. They'll wait, watching, knowing that one day she will be drawn back, unable to resist the call of the Forbidden Cliff Hotel. Evelyn drives away from the Forbidden Cliff Hotel, each mile putting more distance between her and the nightmare she barely escaped. Yet, despite the wind rushing past her, carrying the scent of freedom, a lingering unease clings to her, settling in the back of her mind like a shadow she can't shake. The road before her twists and turns, mirroring the treacherous corridors she left behind. She grips the steering wheel tighter, as if the act of holding on can ground her, can prove that she is in fact free. But every so often, a flash in the rearview mirror catches her eye, her own reflection, yet somehow different. For a split second, she thinks she sees herself smiling, a crooked, ominous grin that vanishes the moment she blinks. She tries to rationalize it as exhaustion, a symptom of the horrors she endured. But the whispers persist, faint and distant, carried on the wind like a forgotten lullaby that tugs at her memory. They are the same voices she heard in the hotel, the voices of lost souls bound to the cliff. It's as if they're following her, calling to her, reminding her that the hotel's grip is never truly broken. The thought fills her with dread. She escaped, but a part of her will always be tethered to that cursed place, drawn back to the shadows and the cliff's edge. Days turn into weeks, yet Evelyn's sense of freedom never quite returns. She finds herself haunted by strange dreams, each one pulling her back to the cliff. In her sleep, she's back in the hallways of the hotel, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. She walks alone through endless corridors, walls closing in around her, with whispers growing louder, calling her name. In these dreams, she feels an inexplicable urge to return, a dark curiosity gnawing at her, tempting her to face the mystery she left unsolved. Every morning, she wakes drenched in sweat, the feeling of being watched lingering long after she's shaken herself awake. One night, as she finally begins to drift off, she hears a distinct sound outside her window, a familiar, eerie melody. Her heart skips a beat as she recognizes the lullaby, the same haunting tune that filled her room at the Forbidden Cliff Hotel. She pulls back the curtains, half expecting to see the cliffside stretching before her, but all she sees is her quiet street, dark and empty. Yet the melody doesn't stop. It weaves through her mind, filling her room with a cold, spectral presence, and she feels an overwhelming compulsion to follow it. She stumbles to her door, her mind numb, her body moving as if guided by a force beyond her control. In the days that follow, the strange occurrences only escalate. Objects in her home are rearranged as if someone has been there, touching her belongings with unseen hands. The old photograph she found at the hotel, the one of herself as a child, standing by the cliff, appears on her nightstand, though she could swear she left it behind. It's a reminder, a taunt, and a threat all in one, as if the hotel is marking her, claiming her piece by piece. She feels its presence in every shadow, hears its whispers in every quiet moment, and the realization dawns on her. She never truly left. The Forbidden Cliff Hotel is not just a place. It's a part of her now, an indelible mark etched into her soul. One evening, unable to bear the weight of the mystery any longer, Evelyn finds herself reaching for the old rusted key she kept from the hotel. The key feels unnaturally cold, as if infused with the chill of the cliffside, and as she holds it, memories flood her mind. Moments from her childhood she'd long forgotten, fragments of her mother's voice warning her about the darkness in the sea. She realizes, with a sense of dread, that her connection to the hotel goes back further than she thought. Her family had once lived near that cliff, and the hotel had been a place of fascination for her as a child. The memories are fragmented, but she recalls her mother pulling her away from the cliff's edge, whispering that the sea is hungry. Desperation drives her to investigate her family's past, and what she discovers leaves her chilled to the bone. Generations ago, her ancestors had owned the land where the hotel now stands. The family had been haunted by tragedy, with relatives disappearing mysteriously, lost to the cliff or the sea. Legends speak of a pact made long ago, an unholy agreement to keep the hotel standing, a promise that required a sacrifice. Her family, it seemed, had been bound to this cursed land, their bloodline forever linked to the cliff's insatiable hunger. Armed with this dark knowledge, Evelyn realizes that she has two choices: return to the hotel to confront the forces that bind her family to the cliff, or live the rest of her life under its shadow, haunted by whispers and visions, knowing it will one day claim her. But even as she considers her options, she feels the pull of the cliff, the call of the sea, urging her back, promising answers and an end. With her heart pounding, Evelyn stands on the threshold of her door, the rusty key clutched in her hand. She knows what awaits her: a final confrontation with the malevolent forces that have haunted her family for generations, a battle against the darkness that has already begun to seep into her mind. As she steps into the night, she glances back one last time, feeling the weight of the cliff, the hotel, and the countless souls that linger there waiting. In the distance, she thinks she hears the faint strains of that eerie lullaby, the same melody that haunted her in the hotel. It fills the silence, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, that some places hold power beyond understanding. She walks toward the cliff, knowing that even if she escapes again, she will never truly be free. The cliff is patient, the hotel is waiting, and it knows that eventually every soul returns.